church did not ordain women, and
Right.
women were not supposed to be involved in that part of the church. My parents, particularly my mother, did not find this to be a suitable frame for our understanding of our faith. And so we became United Methodist. And even then she was shy about accepting her spiritual call, but eventually she did. And that's when they went to grad school.
And then they both had congregations. They were both practicing in different churches.
Yeah, they finished in Georgia in 92. They waited a year. So one of my younger sisters, she's a couple years behind me in school. They let her finish high school on, I think she graduated on Saturday. They moved back to Mississippi on Monday.
Okay.
They wanted to get out of Georgia.
Yeah.
So they moved back to Mississippi. My dad had two church charge, and my mom had 3 churches in rural Mississippi. And eventually my mom became the first woman to consolidate churches in the state of Mississippi and built a consolidated church. It's actually this big pink church on the side of the highway that was a community center. It was a gathering space. And my dad ran the outreach ministry in my mom's church.
So you grew up in the church?
I grew up in the church, but more than that, my parents really raised us to believe that if you saw a problem, you were supposed to fix it. So my mom would call us the genteel poor.
Yeah.
We had no money, but we watched PBS and we read books. And my parents would take us to volunteer regularly, and we would look askance. We're like, you do realize we're poor too.
Yeah.
And their response was, it doesn't matter. No matter how little we have, there's somebody with less. Your job is to serve that person. And so we really grew up with this both faith tradition, but also a service tradition that said, you don't let other people suffer if you can help. You don't let other people have lack if you can give. Your job is to be in community. Your faith, and particularly when we became Methodist, the organization of our faith said that you live your faith by doing good, but we'd been raised that way. Plus, my parents also raised us. They would take us with them when they would go to vote. And so we grew up with this very, strong triumvirate of sort of this faith narrative, a service narrative, but also a democracy narrative.
Yeah.
Government didn't do what it was supposed to for us and didn't do what it was supposed to for our community, but that did not exempt us of the responsibility of trying to hold it accountable.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about that in the book a bit about how these promises were made or laws were passed, and that because of the way the federal system works, that they weren't necessarily enforceable on a state level. So there was a lot of waiting and ineffectiveness, and things that were promised didn't happen. But your parents, had, I guess it's a sort of not just faith, but that they needed to be part of the system because that was their responsibility.
Absolutely. My parents had a critical understanding of life.
Yeah.
They'd grown up in various degrees of poverty. They had grown up under Jim Crow, but they also both had experienced and seen what could be if the systems work the way they should.
Yeah.
And separately and together, their ethos said they had an obligation to try to make that manifest. And they raised us with the same idea.
And that's sort of the backdrop of faith, service, civic responsibility. But what did you want to do with your life early on?
I didn't know. I actually I cycled through many ideas. My first year in college, I majored in physics and philosophy, and I minored in theater, and I was the star of the spring play.
Yeah, what play?
Death of the Last Black Man in the Whole Entire World by Suzanne Laurie Parks.
Did you like acting?
Oh, I love acting.
Yeah.
I went to performing arts high school in my last years of high school.
Oh, yeah? So that was part of the dream?
It was, until I realized I did not want to do what it took to be an actress long term, because I loved acting, but not enough to make that my life. I loved physics, but not enough to study differential calculus. I'm like, I can watch Star Trek and I'll read, Carl Sagan. I'll be okay.
Yeah, that's enough. Yeah.
It feeds me. I read Alan Lightman, and I get my fix.
Uh-huh. And philosophy, you kind of live philosophy when you do the work in politics anyways.
Exactly.
What was it was there a defining moment where you knew you had, did you get a political calling?
So in 1992, when the Rodney King decision came down, I helped lead protests in Atlanta.
Uh-huh.
but I also got into an argument with the mayor of Atlanta and told him he was not doing enough in his role to help poor young people. And I used to go to city council meetings, not because I wanted to be in politics, but I was raised to understand if you wanted to know how people spent your money, show up. So I went to city council meetings.
In college, when you were in college? Yeah.
I was the most boring freshman in college you can imagine. I went to zoning meetings and I went to zoning hearings, and I sat in city council meetings because I wanted to understand it.
Yeah. You wanted to understand government.
I wanted to understand government. I didn't want to be in it. I just wanted to know why they were so bad at what they did. And so I got into a fight with Maynard Jackson, who was the mayor of Atlanta.
Yeah.
And the few months later, he gave me a job. But I still didn't think I wanted to do this for a living. However, as I mentioned, I had multiple majors. The dean of the college made me write a paper about what I wanted to know when I left, because she was determined I would leave and that I had to have a degree to get out. And she's like, you can't keep majoring in things.
Yeah.
So there was actually a little note in the registrar's office saying I was not allowed to declare another major. So you had to go get this form.
Yeah.
They were not permitted to give me the form. And instead I had to write this paper. And when I wrote the paper, I realized what woke me up, what made me excited about my day, what I enjoyed learning, not more than other things, but what really helped organize my mind was the intersection of politics, economics, and sociology. And so I made up a degree where I studied those things, and that moved me into this world.
And that it was but it was the LA riots, kind of got you into organizing.
Yeah, I mean, my parents had us. We'd been protesting. We'd done all of these little pieces. That was the first time I was the lead, and then I was a part of an organization of students. I left the organization after a little while because they were more interested in the protest piece. I believe in protest, but I've always believed that protest had to have a practical end. Yeah. And and this is not at all a castigation of anyone else. There are those for whom activism is the thing, and we need people who constantly hold us accountable and highlight what's happening in the system. And we've got people for whom being a part of the system is the work they do. It's how they deliver. I've always straddled those worlds. And so I believe in the protest, but I also believe protest has to have a practical end. And what I found is that I needed to be on the practical side.
Right.
And the more I did it, I decided I needed to be in charge of the practical side, because people didn't do what you told them. And because I'm not an authoritarian, I had to get elected to jobs that would permit you to fix the things that were broken. I think about it in this. My parents do direct action. Their lives have been about being in service to individuals, and that is critical. I have always been more fascinated by and drawn to how do you fix the systems, because you want the systems to work, because there will always be people in need. No matter what problems we fix, new ones will crop up to take their place. And so you want people who are in the activist space, in the direct service space. I'm compelled by the system piece, which is how do you dismantle systems that don't work or work the way they're intended, but don't serve the people they should.
Right.
And then how do you build new systems and put in place the infrastructure so that the old can't creep in and take over again? And that's where my focus is.
And where'd you where'd you do the graduate work?
So I did a master's degree in public policy at the University of Texas in the LBJ School of Public Affairs.
Yeah.
And then I did my law degree at Yale.
Yeah.
And I focused on tax policy and public policy.
So you've got it all covered.
I try to learn stuff. Yeah.
And then where did you have time? But wasn't there, I know there was some writing going on.
Yes. So during law school, my last year of law school, I wrote an article in fact, I wrote my thesis and got it published as a journal article on the operational dissonance of the unrelated business income tax exemption. But yeah. I also wrote my first romance novel called Rules of Engagement.
It sounds like a spy novel.
It was actually. That's very astute. It started out as a spy novel.
Yeah.
But I was writing it in 1999.
Right.
There were no Black women who had ever been published writing in espionage. There were very few women who had ever been published in espionage.
Yeah.
And there were no novels with Black women as the heroine. And so I made my spies fall in love and got a romance novel published instead.
So you're able to find a way in.
I try to be practical whenever I can.
And did it sell well?
It sold pretty well, yeah. Over the course, I mean, again, I was writing romantic suspense as a Black author at the very beginning of Black writers in the romance space being taken seriously. There have been amazing women like Beverly Jenkins and Brenda Jackson, but there weren't a lot of Black women who were taken seriously, especially in romantic suspense.
Yeah.
So I sold fairly well enough that they bought 2 more books, and then I got picked up by St. Martin's Press, and then I got picked up by HarperCollins. So my books have sold more than 100,000 copies, but I, as I put it, I could pay car notes with it. I could not buy a car.
Right. But you didn't write under your name.
I did not, because when I was about to publish, my article on tax policy had come out, and Google had just become a thing.
Yeah.
And if you Googled Stacey Abrams, it will pull out both my tax article and the first thing I ever published, which was when I was in high school. I wrote this paper in my physics class, and I got published in the Journal of the Astronomical Society of the Atlantic at Georgia State University. And so no one was going to read a romance novel by Alan Greenspan or, Stephen Hawking. So I had a separate identity for my romance.
What's the name?
Selena Montgomery.
And okay, so people can go buy those books if they want.
They can indeed.
Now, what's going on with you, like today, on a day like today, with what's going on in Atlanta around the elections? And you have, I mean, you're a person in politics that has a very active nemesis in Brian Kemp. That do you like how much anger and spite do you have on a daily basis against him personally when you have these days?
It would be disingenuous to say that isn't personal.
Yeah.
But that kind of vendetta just takes a lot of energy, and there's too much to do.
Yeah.
But I like to quote Bruce Banner from the Avengers when he says, "I'm always angry."
Yeah.
So I am, but it's a low simmering anger that helps me remember why I do what I do, and when I'm tired and exhausted. But it's also, he's not good at his job. He has endangered our people.
Yeah.
He is supporting a system and continues to support, in fact, was the architect of a system of voter suppression that is harming people on this very day. And he's the proof of the inverse relationship of voter suppression and voter participation. Despite having the suppressive system that runs the gamut, we are seeing record turnout, in part because people, when you tell them they can't have something, they may decide they don't want it, but you're not going to tell them they can't have it. And especially if they think that more is possible if they do, if they try. And
also, it was your efforts during your campaign for governor that got a lot of these people registered.
We got a lot of folks registered. So the registration work started in 2014, because to the earlier conversation, all of these things take time. There is no instantaneous result.
Right.
There's a demographic change happening across the South, happening around the country, but you have to harness it. And so I started an organization in 2014 to start registering the 800,000 unregistered people of color in our state. The organization is now independent of me, but at this point, they've registered more than 400,000 of those people. So halfway there.
Yeah.
I started Fair Fight because I watched voter suppression happen and wanted to build an organization that could begin to tackle it, because not winning the election and being really mad wasn't going to solve the problem.
Right.
And so I started an organization. And then when I got past my first wave of just righteous anger, I started thinking about the national scope of this problem. And so we're operating in 18 states, and we're helping fund and support folks in these states to tackle voter suppression.
You were in the state house and you were a state representative, right?
I was 11 years.
Yeah. So you know how it, that was the hands-on experience of how it worked.
Absolutely. I mean, I was a legislator for 11 years. I was the leader of the Democrats for 7 years.
Yeah.
And when I would hear people, badmouth either Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, like the hardest job